Hello folks, and welcome back to the next instalment in this series, how to make a man cave, she shed, workshop, cabin in the woods. The principle is all the same, regardless of how big it is or what you decide to call it. So as you can see, the subframe is now on the foundations, and we're now in a position where we can start fitting the floor. So we're using 18mm construction grade OSB boards, which I believe stands for orientated strand board. Now these are construction grade, they're very strong, and they're also quite heavy, so it's preferable to actually have somebody with you. Now it is important to make it clear that these boards do not come treated, so if you're going to use them outside, you do need to treat them with an appropriate preserver, which will preserve the boards against rot and also waterproof them as well. So these boards come in at 8x4 or 2.4 by 1.2 meters. And we're actually going to secure these using 65mm decking screws. Now as you can see, these boards are very strong indeed, and you'll also note that I've actually doubled up the front and back beams of the subframe, because they're the beams which are going to take the main weight of the walls and the roof, so it's important that we have as much strength here as possible. Now, as I say, we'll be screwing these down using decking screws, and before we do that, me and my son are just going to mark out the position of the joists and all of the timbers. Now you can actually gauge it by eye, but I'd prefer to mark out where everything is to make sure that when we fix them, we're bang in the centre of all of the joists. And that work, and that will obviously make sure that the fixings are as secure as possible. And on the ends here, Jared, we do to make sure we are not screwing right between them again. And also, of course, if you're in a situation where you have a couple of large timbers which have been screwed together, you want to make sure that the screws are actually dead centre of the timbers rather than in the gap between the timbers, obviously because it's going to be a lot stronger. So as you can see, we're using these timber deck double countersunk decking screws. You get 500 in a pack. I bought them from Screwfix and they cost around about £14 for 500. Now they do come on special offer every now and again, and if you can get a slightly better deal on these, they're certainly worth it. I think one of the key advantages using these is the fact that you do not need to drill a pilot hole, so that saves a lot of time. And if there are two of you, and so for example you've each got a tool, you don't need to use one of those tools to have a drill bit in and the other tool to actually have the screwing head in. You can just have two tools both screwing in and basically doubling your output. The other thing is as well that I've used these decking screws so many times, and only very rarely indeed have I actually been in a situation where they have snapped or the heads get chewed up. These are very strong and very durable. Now my son's got the impact driver at the moment and I'm using the combi drill, and having used both of these within short succession, it does make a noticeable difference, and you may or may not be able to tell from this clip here that when I'm using the combi drill, there's a little bit of squeaking where the screw goes in, so you have to push that a little bit harder in order to get the screws into more difficult timber. And also I found that I had to keep adjusting the torque setting on the drill, because sometimes it would actually screw the head of the screw below the surface of the board, and other times it wouldn't, so it does make a noticeable difference when you compare it with the impact driver. But that's just something I thought I'd share with you. So as we can see, you know, we're getting ready to fit the second board now. And basically we're just repeating what we've done previously. Now before we fit this second and third board in place, we're just making sure that we absolutely saturate any exposed edges with the clear coat. So second one's down, we're now on the last one. Now, I just thought I'd mention that in early videos in this series, some people have suggested that I put down a sort of a damp-proof course or a very heavy-duty polythene underneath this decking, and you know, I'm not entirely convinced that it's necessary. For a start, as you can see, this decking is actually off the ground. It's also very well ventilated, and the boards have been absolutely saturated with this rock-proof and weatherproof coating, the clear coat, which really does soak very well indeed into the underside of the board. So I'm not unduly concerned about it. In terms of things like drafts coming through the floor, I mean, that's always a possibility. If that situation arose, then all I do basically just get some flexible frame sealant, just go down the joins, and then smooth it out using a wet spatula. So you know, that's not a problem as far as I'm concerned. The screws, as you can see, I'm actually securing those every sort of 6 or 7 inches. So anyway, we're looking good at the moment, aren't we? Everything's pretty much done. We're 90% of the way there. However, the next task is to make sure I trim back any overhang on the boards, because they are slightly bigger than the frame, and also to make sure that I treat any cut edges. I mean, this clear coat stuff, I mean, it's very, very cheap, but it's very, very effective, and it does soak, you know, quite a distance into the actual timbers. I'll wholeheartedly recommend it. So we've got the old circular saw out, and this does make life very easy indeed. And it's one of these things whereby it's a tool, it cost me just over £50. I've had it for a couple of years now, and I wish I'd have bought one ages ago. Right folks, so I'm in a position where I need to start cutting down timber in order that I can actually make the walls. Now there is a massive consideration here, and it's to do with the planning regulations. Now because this outbuilding will be within 2 metres of a boundary wall, the maximum height of the structure, and this is obviously UK, the maximum height is 2.5 metres from the ground. Now the thing is, there is a little bit of a slope in the garden, so the question arises as to, is it 2.5 metres from that side or that side? And because it's on a slope, it will be 2.5 metres from the ground at the highest point adjacent to the property. So it's going to be this corner here basically. So the maximum height of this structure needs to be no more than 2.5 metres. So obviously this side here, it's going to be slightly more by about another 150 mil. Now the thing is, I'm actually going to put a single pitch roof on it. So in other words, you know, it's the roof from front to back will be at a slight slope like that, back to front. So what I'm going to do here now is just to sort of work out a few measurements as to how, you know, how high I need to build these walls. So I'm just going to sort of, you know, take some measurements, sketch it out on a bit of paper, and then work out my cuts. But the first thing I want to do is to sort of measure out 2.5 metres on this length of timber here. So in this clip here then, I actually measured out 2.5 metres less the height of the deck from the ground. which gave me the working height. This enabled me to better calculate the height of the walls, and also given the fact that the roof was going to be a pitch roof, it would be higher at the front, lower at the back, and there also need to be an overhang to shed rainwater, that sort of thing. It just gave me a much better idea, and it was easier to calculate how high I could build the roof and the angle of the pitch on the roof.